My name is Robert Edward Hayhurst. My name is Robert Edward Hayhurst.
My name is Meg Serafino, and I'll be interviewing Robert Hayhurst today. We're at Lake Michigan College. We're doing this for the Library of Congress and the Lest We Forget group. Anyway, Robert, could you tell me about your family? You know, where you grew up, siblings?
Okay, I was born in Waukesha, Wisconsin, February 2nd, 1943. I'm the oldest of four children. I have a brother, Richard, sister Carol, and a sister Janet. Most of our childhood was spent in northwestern Wisconsin, in New Richmond, Wisconsin, and I graduated from high school there. After graduation from high school, I attended University of Wisconsin Stout in Menominee, Wisconsin.
What, did you graduate
Yes.
from there? What degree?
Degree in industrial technology. Entered, the Vietnam War was going on, and the draft was in everyone's minds, and I decided to enlist in the Army and pursue activity as a special agent in military intelligence.
Why the Army?
I guess my father was a first sergeant, World War II. Had an uncle that was killed in Italy in World War II. Mainly, I guess, because of the military intelligence that I wanted to get into that field, as opposed to the rest of my friends and colleagues at the time were being drafted and sent right to the infantry. So,
Good reason. What years did you?
1966 to 1969. And after basic training at Fort Leonard, Missouri, was sent to Fort Holabird, Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, and did the intelligence training all right there at Fort Holabird.
How long did that take?
It was about a 5-month course, almost 24 hours a day, in all aspects of intelligence, from information gathering to counterintelligence to interrogations to just a lot of different areas of intelligence. And then from there, the graduating class, which consisted of 109, a third were Army, another third were Marines, and then there were a smattering of civilian intelligence from the National Security Agency, the State Department, some naval intelligence personnel, because this was the military intelligence training school that the government had. So,
Was there
very good
any
school.
survival type training? Or
Yes, a
anything
little
like
bit,
that?
but not much.
Okay.
Intelligence at that time, we're talking 42 years ago, 43 years ago. You're put into lots of different types of units, so they had to train you for different. Now, some were actually combat units doing intelligence work for a certain unit. I guess I was very fortunate in my 3-year career in the Army. Following the graduation from the intelligence school, I was sent to Germany. The Cold War was still going on. I spent a year in Stuttgart, Germany, at the 66th Military Intelligence Group headquarters outside of Stuttgart, and there the intelligence in Germany at the time, Europe, all of Europe, were counteracting intelligence efforts from the Russians and from the East Germans. There were, at that time, offensive intelligence and then counterintelligence. And in counterintelligence, there was offensive counterintelligence and defensive counterintelligence, is how you're dealing with the enemy and how you are throwing off their plans, and then how you're protecting your own personnel or your own units by providing good background investigations and for security clearances and that sort of thing. That was one type, and that was going on in Germany. At the end of 1967, I volunteered because the war was going on, and I wanted a little different kind of an action. Volunteered for a transfer to Vietnam, and was sent to Vietnam. There I was, after a initiation period, or a period of, I guess, being familiar with the country and what was happening in Vietnam, was sent up to Hue, the city of Hue, to be a member of a 5-man team, military intelligence team, which was the 1st Battalion of the 525th MI Group. Hue is an old imperial city, about 60 kilometers south of the demilitarized zone. The 5-man unit, we lived in a house, an old French provincial house. Upstairs were our bedrooms, downstairs were our offices. We were probably 3 or 4 blocks from the local MACB compound, the military compound. We were given civilian identification, United States civilian identification, not part of the military, because we were doing lots of other types of intelligence work over there. Primarily gathering intelligence about the enemy, about the Viet Cong and about the North Vietnamese troops that were infiltrating. But at the same time, we're doing work, counterintelligence work for our own military. All ranks, high officers, full colonels, and on down, anyone needing security clearances has to get this background investigations, and our unit would provide that also. So the way the military is in the rank and file, when we were sent to an artillery unit or an infantry unit or whatever, and you had to interview or investigate a member of the unit to update their clearance, sometimes we had to wear different uniforms. Sometimes we had to wear a captain's uniform, or a major's uniform, lieutenant's uniform, sometimes just a sergeant's uniform. You know.
So you fit in more?
So the people we're talking with are more comfortable. There were a number of high-ranking Army officers that would not want to talk to a sergeant or a lowly lieutenant, so then we had to put a different uniform on, have different ID, and they felt comfortable then talking. They wouldn't want to talk with a low, you know. So. Anyway, so.
What did you think of Vietnam when you got there? You'd been in Germany.
Mm-hmm. This is a whole different experience, intelligence-wise, a whole different experience. But that part of Vietnam was culturally very, very interesting. The city of Hue was meant a great deal to the South Vietnamese and to the North Vietnamese. The University of Hue was there. Leaders from both the North and the South were graduates of the University of Hue. It would be like years ago in our Civil War, where members of the South and members of the North both graduated from West Point together. You know, that was what the University of Hue had in common with those folks. So, and the old imperial city with the citadel and the seat of power for the rulers at the time. It was a very interesting city, very compacted, maybe 150,000 people living in an area much smaller than much smaller than Benton Harbor or St. Joe's. Or, but anyway, it was very interesting. You know. very interesting.
So is that what you did most of your time there?
Yes, until the Tet Offensive broke out, 1968 Tet Offensive. Part of my function before the Tet Offensive was to work with Australian troops, Korean troops, and of course our own units, and South Vietnamese units in the area. We were the first unit that would do interrogations of captured NVA soldiers or NVA soldiers that defected. And with the help of interpreters, we interrogate them for
Were they like
information.
brought to you where you were at, or how did that work?
We were brought to them. They were being held in confinement. We were brought to
Okay.
them. So, to get as much information as we could about, why they were there and what was happening on their side, and then turn that information over to authorities. So, the units that needed that information. So, it was a real different, mixed experience in the intelligence services in Vietnam, much different than Germany, much different. And because you're fighting there's a different purpose, there's a different enemy, there's a different kind of action, so. Also, we were involved with, because of this civilian identification that we had, we were being posed as American advisors to the South Vietnamese government, helping them build bridges and roads and improve their crops and better rice and all this different things. That was our cover, but we were there for intelligence purposes. And I'm not giving away any secrets. This was, I'm sure it's changed greatly since then, the effort of the intelligence service, so.
Did
Very
anything-
interesting.
Anything else happen while you were there? I mean, how did it go? You had your job to do.
Yeah, I got a chance to visit a lot of different units in that I Corps of South Vietnam, up to Quai Son, up to Quan Tri. Those are quite remote units, great areas. And there were some battles and things that took place when I was visiting for a couple days doing jobs at Quai Son. They were invaded. Interesting. You were flown up there and flown back in various sized planes, not helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft. A lot of our other travels were through with Air America, would take us around in small planes.
What was Air America?
It was a government funded, sponsored type of civilian air unit. Small planes, 2 and 4 passenger planes that could take off and land very quickly, very powerful, could take off on a short runway, not much longer than this room, and just get airborne and then travel, as opposed to helicopters. They must have been contracted with our government to do this sort of thing, shuttle individuals around. But at the end of January 1968, we were all caught by surprise when the 1968 Tet Offensive hit. And would you like to hear a little bit about that? Okay. From my perspective, it all started the evening of, as I remember, January 30th, or early in the morning of the 31st. Leading up to that, most every night, our house is in the city on the western bank of the river, the new part of the city, and within maybe a half mile, quarter of a mile from the actual outskirts of Hue. But we'd hear machine gun fire and mortar fire almost every night for a while, and it was NVA units interacting with either our military or the South Vietnamese military. but it's very commonplace. Except that particular night, it started and didn't let up. And it just kept on all night long, and more guns, and all of a sudden some planes were activated. Normally planes weren't activated, but planes were activated, South Vietnamese aircraft and American aircraft, and trying to repel the enemy. And when daybreak hit early in the morning of January 31st, our bedrooms were on the second floor, and we look outside and we see columns of troops, North Vietnamese Army troops, walking up the street, just like they own the street. And I thought, oh man, we're behind enemy lines already, you know. And they took a platoon took a position at the corner about up the block on an intersection. You could tell they were not Viet Cong. They were units of the NVA, and how they were dressed. They had branches, tree branches and stuff stuck all in their helmets and backpacks, and so we were 5 men in this unit. We just waited for them to contact or interact with us. We right next door there was a naval intelligence unit with four men there, so we joined forces in their house, the 9 of us, and when the North Vietnamese troops started going house to house, getting everybody out, whether you're South Vietnamese or Americans like we were, that we resisted, and we pooled our weapons together. We didn't have that many weapons, a few boxes of hand grenades, 4 M14 rifles, 45 caliber pistols, and 3 or 4 45 caliber submachine guns, and some phosphorus grenades. But we're in a pretty big house, a concrete type of house now, and they had a 3rd floor, and we fought from the 3rd floor. We destroyed our intelligence files by dropping phosphorus grenades into our file cabinets and melting those. Some of the fellas decided to keep their civilian IDs. I did, and another fellow said, no, we'll put our military IDs on. So we put our dog tags on and destroyed the fake cover IDs and kept our military IDs. So I figured if we were going to be killed or captured, I'd just soon go out as the United States Army. We fought them off that day. Different surges they made. 2 of our fellows were killed. All night long, of just sporadic firing all night long of the January 31st, and then the 1st of February, in the morning, late morning, we ran out of ammunition, and we had to surrender. We had killed a number of their men, and they killed 2 of ours. We had a number of injured, 3 injured. And it's a scary feeling when we're on the 3rd floor, going downstairs, not knowing that what's ahead of you, you know. If you're going to be shot in spot or what. I mean, all they knew was we were Americans. They didn't know what our roles were. I don't think they knew what our roles were, but, you know, we're the enemy, we're Americans, so. But they took us down the street, 3 or 4 blocks behind the houses, because they had to protect us, because the South Vietnamese and the American forces were fighting to get that part of the city back, so they had to protect us, and they put us in a house that they occupied, a pretty big size house. The house was occupied by Philip Manhard. He was a federal service officer for the State Department, and was a very, well, the highest ranking State Department official in that part of Vietnam. He had been captured sometime before. Anyway, we spent that day in that house. That night, 6 of us in a shower, a 6x6 shower, tied up with communication wire holding our elbows back, tied with our elbows. Took our boots away from us, and that was it. And then the next day, on the 2nd, they at night, the night of the 2nd, they took us out of town under the cover of darkness. But all the time we were in that house, there are dive bombers from our Air Force, Marines, and from the South Vietnamese Air Force, fighting in that part of the city. So they had to protect us from being shot by our own people, So they marched us out of town on the evening of the 2nd, my birthday, my 25th birthday. And under dark, obviously, and barefoot, tied behind arms behind our backs, and we marched out. I'm guessing it was to the west. I thought to the west and north of Hue, through some fields, roads, had to cross a river. They put us in boats, took us across a river. Bombing and shelling is going on all the time, but they knew where to take us so we wouldn't get shelled or bombed by our own forces that night. And through some villages, we spent the next day in a little village, sleep in the day, march at night, until they got us into the foothills west of Hue. A few more days march, we made it to a camp in the lower part of the mountains that was a staging area for the North Vietnam Army coming into South Vietnam, and sort of a hospital unit for their wounded, And that time they had gathered 26 of us. 2 civilians, 2 ladies, one was a doctor, one was a school teacher from Holland, Michigan. They had been over there 5 or 6 years in their civilian work, being a medical doctor or a teacher in a South Vietnamese school. But they're foreigners, so they get picked up. There was a French Canadian that did not speak English. He was from Montreal, and there were a number of civilian contractors from the Pacific Architect and Engineers that were captured. They were road builders and different things. They were captured, and then there was Marines and Army personnel, made up to 26 of us all told, and some were injured. 4 or 5 were injured pretty badly. After 2 weeks in this camp, with interrogations every day, they finally found an English-speaking person to come down from Hanoi that could speak English and talk to us. We could communicate with our guards by the limited knowledge of the language, Vietnamese, that we knew, but for the most part, when we wanted to really communicate with our guards that were holding us, they spoke French. And some of our personnel had French in high school, French language training, and so he spoke French. And until this English-speaking person came. Then the interrogations got a little stiffer, and it was something that, because of my training, we just knew that this is part of the game, We were interrogating their men, so something we expected. After 2 weeks at that camp, they gave us our boots back, and the 21 healthiest ones, they put us on a march heading straight west to Laos, and told us that This march was going to take 10 to 12 days. Each of us got a gunny sack of 20 pounds of rice to carry on our back. And we set out. Now we're in the jungle, and mountainous jungle, so we didn't have to travel at night. And it was up hills and craters and rivers and everything else we're crossing, heading towards Laos. We're going to the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, and then they were going to take us north, and then into North Vietnam. In North Vietnam to continue on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then eventually to Hanoi. Well, after 4 days of that march, another fellow and myself, Edward Dearling, who was a member of our office, of our unit, we decided to make a run for it and escape. We talked to all the other 21 to see if they wanted to come with us. Civilians, no. Some were injured, some didn't know how to swim. Some were afraid. They said, well, we'll take our chances. They may release us in a couple of months because the war is going a certain direction, and let's not endanger ourselves. Let's just see what happens. We'll be captives, and we'll be released in a few months. They kept telling us, you'll be released, you'll be released. But I was worried because of my intelligence training and my job and what we knew about the other units in the whole area, that it wouldn't be a good experience to be seriously interrogated. So we got the blessing of our appointed commanders that, yes, go ahead, that's your duty to escape. And we took off right after breakfast, if you call it breakfast, the morning of the 23rd of February. The daily routine on the march is such that we're on these trails going through the jungle, the mountainous jungle. We're in the mountains now, and the trails are not any more than maybe 6 feet wide, and it's a thick jungle wall on both sides. In this march, 2 or 3 times a day, they would have us get off the trail, sit in the bushes, just wait, because a North Vietnamese unit's going the other direction. This is one of their highways we're on. And the North Vietnamese troops are going the other direction, and they're looking at us, and we're looking at them. And they're carrying their weapons, and they've got, in some cases, women and children carrying rockets for them and as porters. We get off the trail, let them pass, and then we keep going the other direction, But they've been doing this for years. They know how to work. So early in the morning, they'll start a campfire covered by a hutch that they make out of branches and leaves and everything else to hide the smoke. And they'll cook enough rice for that meal and to make rice balls about the size of a big snowball. So that's your breakfast in the morning is a bowl of rice with a little rock salt, and then you pack another ball and leaves and carry that with you and stop halfway through the day, and that's your lunch too. And then at nighttime, when it gets dark, you stop walking and they build another fire and cook rice for at nighttime. And that's what the 20 pounds of rice everybody had to carry. It had to be enough rice for all of us to get to the next camp, which was, I don't know how many miles away, so in North Vietnam. So we did not wait for that. On the 23rd of February, after that first meal, we're down by a creek, washing our utensils, and the guards, they wash their utensils. Now we've been captured now a little over 3 weeks, and we're way inside enemy territory, and I think they knew that if we tried to escape, someone will pick us up, someone will recapture us, shoot us, whatever, So they didn't have to really worry about us like they did early on. And there was a number of us washing our utensils by the creek, and when a guard turned the other way and went back around the bushes to his campsite, or packing things up to get ready to move on that morning, we took off in the other direction down the trail and got to this river we had crossed the day before, jumped in the river, swam across, got on the bank on the other side, and just didn't move for about 2 hours. Well, that's what it seemed like, but quite a long time to see if anyone was following us. No one followed us, so then we crept back down the river. This is a river that's 50 feet, maybe 100 feet across, fast-moving river out of the mountains, cold, but flowing very fast. And so we got in the river and floated down the river out of the mountains. We knew that pilots back then that were shot down in Vietnam were told, get to the seacoast and you'll be picked up on the seacoast. Planes are up and down the seacoast and they'll find survivors that way. So we figured, well, our best chance is to get to the seacoast. In Vietnam, being a narrow country, right along the ocean there, all rivers flow to the sea. We'll just ride this river to the sea. That was our idea. And we floated out of the mountains, stopped about every hour, hour and a half, just to warm up a little bit, pick leeches off of us, rest a little bit, then get back in and keep floating down. Towards the end of that day, almost dark, we heard some noise ahead of us. And it was a North Vietnamese Army unit back off that river, maybe 50 yards or so. They were near the river but not on the river, but we could hear them, and we peeked up and could see them. So we stayed in the water and floated real slowly by the bank where they couldn't see us on their side. If we were on the other side, they'd see us. So we floated and we got past them and then kept on going, and river started getting slower and slower, wider and wider, and we spotted a road on the other side of the river with a lot of American boot prints all over it, and fresh boot prints. So we swam across the river and looked it over and said, we've kind of had it with the river. We were really cold, and this is February, and it's cold temperature and everything, of course, and decided to walk that road and see where that took us. And I'm not sure how many, a couple miles, maybe, I don't know. And we got to a Marine outpost, way out, an artillery outpost. We didn't know it was Marines, and we just could hear Americans talking kind of in the dark, in the dusk. Didn't know what they were, but they were Americans, So we thought, well, let's just walk into this unit and see what happens, And it was a Marine military artillery unit. And lucky again, because one fellow stopped us and said, "What are you guys doing here?" You just walked right through a minefield to get to us. They had a big killing zone. I said, "We're just following the boot." He said, "We put those there for purpose." So he listed all these mines and these posts that way out in the countryside where these units were. They had their rows of tents and different buildings that their communications and their soldiers' units and whatever. But then they had a fence with machine gun units all around, and then they had their artillery guns pointed in various directions, and then they had this big, almost 100 yards of a killing zone, all cleared, so that anybody coming, they could certainly see them, and they had they weren't hidden. Anybody had to come across that open field to and that was called the killing zone. Well, that's we walked right through it on this road, and we were both there. The other fellow and myself were both the same size, 6'3", and so we did not look like an indigenous Vietnamese person. We stood as tall as we could, so they could see who we were, and we had beards, and let us come right in, and we made it, you know. So we figured, we talked with the commanding officer, young captain, looked at aerial photos of the whole area, and he kind of knew the river we were on and had aerial photos from his disposal, and we were there a couple, 3 days because they were so far out in the area that they hadn't had mail in a week. They were down to 2 sea rations a day. They were getting low on ammunition, and they were so far out that in that time in February, the air cover, the ground, I mean the cloud cover was so low that their supplies wouldn't fly them into them because they were so dangerous. They had to fly so low. So we had to wait 3 days, I think it was, before someone came to pick us up and fly us out of there. So we got to know those fellows pretty well, and he figured that we were very close, if not in Laos, very close to Laos when we escaped. So we had to make our way across northern part of South Vietnam. I'm guessing, 35 to 40 miles probably we traveled, you know, before we found this unit. So.
How did they treat you? I mean, when you were on your march?
There were only 4 armed guards and this English-speaking leader. Good. They didn't beat us or anything else. They helped us get across these various rivers. They knew, obviously, they knew where they were going and how long it would take us. The one river that we escaped in, we had to cross that river. We crossed that river the day before we escaped. And they kept on warning us about that river. They said, but don't worry, we'll help you get across. We'll carry the rice for you across that river. It was deep, wide, no bridges, except they had a bridge. Their bridge was a steel cable about 3 or 4 feet below the water, tight, that went all the way across the water, under the water. Part of it was a log, and part of it was some cable, and then there was a cable about a foot above the water that you couldn't see from the air. So you hung onto that cable, the water's up to about here, and you just went along that gear on that bridge underneath the water, and that's how they went across. That's how the troops went back and forth. So a little bit of engineering out there to keep it camouflaged, you know. So they were helpful. Did their job, you know. I thanked God and lucky stars that we were captured by the North Vietnamese as opposed to the Viet Cong that was in the area, because they did not take prisoners. We were captured by professional soldiers, young. They were younger, some, I'm guessing 17, 18, 20 years old, but they were very organized and very, very professional in their job, you know. So.
What were your accommodations like when you were
Traveling?
with them? Yeah, traveling.
You sleep out in the open. I mean, it's raining,
Just
cold.
on the ground?
On the ground, 3 of us slept together, front to back on the ground, and about every hour we would rotate and put another person in the middle, and we'd take turns on the outside. Keep doing that because it was so cold at night. 35 to 40 degrees was average nighttime temperature up in the mountains, and raining lots of times, so you're just shivering and wet. The guards had little tents, hammocks that they tied from tree to tree, and they would be in a hammock, but we're on the ground, you know, we're just laying on the ground. And in that 3+ week period, I went from 215 pounds to 155 when I checked into the first hospital that took us. I had a wound in my foot, infection. But you were burning so much calories, that's where the rice didn't help you, and you were just keeping warm, you're burning calories, so that's where the weight loss came. The movement, and then you're just cold and shivering, so your body's trying to generate heat. That's how I thought of, why we were losing weight so fast. So, and we didn't drink water, didn't dare drink their water. In the evening, they would finish cooking the rice. We all shared the big pot we all shared, took turns, all of us, guards, captors, all captives all shared. And when the rice was done, they'd fill it up with water and throw in a few handfuls of tea leaves and boil it. And then we'd boil the water, and then we all drank that tea, because that's figured it was going to be safe then, And the guard said, don't drink the water. Wait till we cook this rice, or wait till we cook the tea and then drink the tea. So that's the only water we had. So.
Did you have dysentery or
No.
anything like that?
No. I don't know what you call it. I think it was very common, at least I did, and there was a few others. I did not have a bowel movement for 16 days. Now, I'm sure part of it's the emotion, part of it's I'm guessing your body might have shut down a little bit or whatever, but didn't ever have the urge to go. You were eating this rice and that's the only medical problem, that and infection.
How did you get the infection on your foot?
I walking on the rocks, different things, back when we first left town.
Before they gave you boots, or?
Yeah, before they gave us our boots back for that long march. They marched us for 3-4 days barefoot because they didn't want you to escape,
So where did you go from there after you got picked up from the Marines?
Yes, they kept on calling the Marines to come get us because that was a Marine unit and they wouldn't come to get us. So this young captain said, well, the heck with that noise. They called a unit of the 101st Airborne Army, and these guys said, we'll be right over. So they came right over, picked the two of us up, brought their mail for them, brought big bags of mail that the unit hadn't gotten for a week or so, a couple weeks, and they brought some rations for them, just as if they were a Marine unit. And there was a lady, Vietnamese lady that was in the camp. I'm not sure what her job was, but she got a ride with us when we left, and they took us to Phu Bai, a military unit that was close, a compound that was close. And the 101st Airborne group, the helicopter, was a gunship. Had room enough for us in the middle, 3 of us in the middle of it. Doors are open. Each had a door gunner and the pilot and co-pilot up front. And they picked us up, and I thought they were just going to go straight to Phu Bai, about 10 miles away. I'm just guessing that's where, Well, no, these fellas were flying just above the trees, zigzagging back and forth. So finally I said, what are you guys doing? Why aren't we going straight? Well, they were just looking for some action. I thought that's pretty good. The Marines didn't want to come in there, but these Army group, they just soon had a little fun that day, so. They didn't see anything, but we got there, got put into a hospital. Members of our unit, but we were all part of the same group. And they started debriefing us. Took showers, of course, and all that the first time. And we slept with tape recorders for a couple nights there. Tape recorders rang all the time, in case we mumbled something or whatever, debriefing us. And then we went from there to Da Nang for a day or so, and then another hospital. Then from there, we got flown down to Saigon. And that was another couple couple of weeks down there in the hospital at Long Been, and
What was the main reason they had you hospitalized so much? Was it the
because
weight
we're
loss? and
weight loss and it's
weakness?
infection, yeah, and weak and everything else, yeah. Checking us out thoroughly, and plus the debriefing. The debriefing took, a good couple of weeks, you know. Constantly going over and over what we saw, describing everyone, all of our captors, people who were captured with us, obviously their names, everything we knew about them. The captors, what our, the NVA was like, how many, who they were, unit markings. I mean, it was just so much information to give. There was an awful lot. And then maybe we were trained to be very observant, I don't know, but routes and buildings and everything you could think of, would be helpful, just to be helpful, so. Finally got that report finished. Mine was 28 pages. Had to read it. It was a single space, 28 pages, and they had to go through and proof it and make sure they got it right and then sign it. So
what did you do after that?
they gave us a choice. They said the Army, and we met some high-ranking Army officials and stuff, because we, at the time, 1968, they told us we were the 10th and the 11th prisoners to escape in the whole history of the war. That's all, from the time it started, and heavily started back in the early 60s, So we were kind of the oddities there, and they came in one day and said, "Well, you're going to be, you get a choice of assignment in Vietnam or a choice of assignment anywhere else in the world." They knew I came from Germany, and another fella, he was assigned in the States. I think it was in Portland, Oregon. So he said, "You get three choices. Give me your three choices right now." And I said, I'll take Milwaukee, Wisconsin's first choice, Chicago second, and Minneapolis, St. Paul the third, because my family was close and all that. Okay, they took it right down. Other fellow says, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Oregon. He was from New Jersey, but anyway, so we got our first choices. Shipped us back. I had a year or so, year and 4 months to go before my 3 years were up, and so I'm back in the Army again, and I'm in the Milwaukee field office. They had to there was an 8-man unit there, civilian clothes, and we had the one unit, because I was coming in, they had to kick somebody else out of that office and send them someplace else. One of the civilians, I think, left, so. So that year in the United States military intelligence was another whole different picture that I was not familiar with. And so I got to see 3 different types of intelligence operations. I thought I was very fortunate. Europe was different. The war zone was different in Vietnam, and then now we're in the United States. And very interesting. Came down to the end, 1969, to get released, and they made me big offers to stay in. Re-up bonus money and choice of assignments and more schooling and much more rank. And I said, no, I think that's it. So I left the military in '69 and went back to Stout, University of Wisconsin Stout, and got a master's degree in communications technology, and got married and started having children, and ended up here in Michigan.
Did you know about the war protests going on over here when you were in Vietnam?
Yes, we saw it going over. When I flew to Vietnam, we left from the Oakland Army base near San Francisco. A lot of protesting done there. That was in 1967. When we came back from Vietnam, we landed in San Francisco. Big 300 passenger, both trips, over and back, 300 passenger commercial airlines. We were, and most of them were all military people on there, in uniforms of all services and then all ranks, and some civilians, but to and from Vietnam. Stop in Hawaii, kind of a thing. Stop at in Guam, and came back to San Francisco. Plane lands out in the tarmac, not up at the terminal, out in the tarmac. So we walked down the stairs and then across a couple hundred yards across the terminal. And the airlines people said, now when you get to the terminal, you walk in that gate, be expecting an awful lot of people there, protesters and stuff. Stay away from them. We'll have guards lined up and ropes. You stay within the ropes. Don't get over, So sure enough, and there was 50 or so. They probably were out there, every plane coming in, that was their job, to come out, harass the troops. And we were getting spit at, yelled at. Stuff thrown at us, signs, everything. Spitting mostly, and I'm walking in. I've got a uniform on. I'm walking in and with a bunch of other fellas that, I don't know what, the Marines and Army and stuff. And I thought these guys were hardened killers. And just served a year in Vietnam in their units. And I thought, geez, I wonder if these protesters really know how close these guys would think twice if they were grabbed or touched or anything else, turning around and attacking them, eliminating them, by their bare hands, not with any guns, but how dangerous I think for those protesters it would be, because these fellows coming back from a war zone, they have a whole different outlook on life, because they've been for the most part killing people for a year, some of the jobs, not all of them, some of them. So. Anyway, that was really hard to listen to, I think because of our experience, we were given a month off before we were to report to our next assignment in Milwaukee. So, I went home and I don't even know what happened to that month. Because, you just came from the experience I had and what really happened. I'm back here at home, sitting in my parents' living room and watching TV at night, or the update on the war, and the war still going on. The Walter Cronkite is showing the battle for Hue every night and how they're trying to recapture the city, and I was just there. I was just in all that sort of stuff, a few weeks before, and it just, what just happened in my life is what you think. Anyway, so we report to Milwaukee in a month, and had a real good assignment there. My commanding officer was a fellow that just returned from Vietnam on a different military intelligence unit, and so we had a lot in common, and we got along great. It was a good experience, it really was.
I think you might have had an advantage being older than, the average.
Maybe, being 25, maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rather than 18, 19.
And maybe, I don't know, just, yeah, probably.
How do you feel about that whole experience now, looking back 40 years? How has it affected your life?
Well, I think it's had a pretty good outlook. I mean, I had a pretty good I think from my perspective, the jobs I've had, I'd see coworkers getting very, very frustrated or uptight or high levels of anxiety on their jobs to get the job done right, and worrying about this or this, and I never had that. I thought, gosh, what we're worrying about here on our jobs is not a life and death situation. It really, I mean, a lot more things to worry about than that. And I think that helped me prepare, take me through the day, the months. So, you know, I was a professional educator. The last 12 years I worked, I was assistant superintendent of schools, and you're dealing with, you know, boards of education and all types of different things at a professional level, and stress level's high, but I never let it bother me, not a bit, you know. So I think probably to help me, you know.
Did your family do anything special when you came home?
My dad was an old first sergeant, very, very tough. Had served, excuse me, in the Army in the invasion of North Africa, and then up in Sicily and Naples, Battle of Naples. Yeah, there was some parties. The small town I was from, some nice parties and stuff. Excuse me. But up until about 5 years ago, my mother and father were the only ones that said, "Welcome home." Oh, I think there were some other, you know, maybe high school, small, you know, my friends at school might have said, "Welcome home," but no one else did, you know. Yeah, there was some nice, in that month I was home, there was a few events, and they wanted me to speak, and it was difficult for me to speak, and over the course of my professional career, I was asked to speak a couple different times to high school classes, history classes, and maybe a few others, but there I'm talking to some students, high school students, about ancient history. You know, they weren't even born yet, let alone, and it would be like the interest I might have had as a kid in the First World War or the Spanish-American War. It happened decades ago to these, you know, so it meant nothing to them, you know. They were just, had to sit there and listen to this guest speaker come in that the teacher got in, and but some kids were interested, and some asked some good questions, but yeah, I guess that, you know, I had, like I said, over a year to go in the Army yet, and had to get back in the game, you know. I have an obligation to do so. And about that time, we were in Milwaukee, we were having some riots. There were riots here in Detroit. There were riots, if you want to call them riots, in Chicago at the 1968 presidential convention. Being an intelligence unit, civilian clothes, we had to come over and help the units that were over here in Detroit and in Chicago. I was assigned to guard, but not really guard, because the Secret Service was also in that game, but to be on the outskirts of a lot of action in the crowd, and it's assigned to Senator Muskie. While he was in and around Chicago. Just, you know, these are all the jobs that the military was providing, working with the local FBI office and the Secret Service offices, you know. In the riots in Milwaukee, Martin Luther King death, and then Detroit, it was burnings and stuff. We had to go over and help those units out, because an intelligence unit's not very big, you know, 8 or 10, that's it, you know. It's not a whole company of, you know, so you're questioning all kinds of people, taking pictures, all these rebel rousers, so to speak, from out of town that were bussed in there to cause the trouble from the south or wherever they were coming from. We had to identify these people, and in essence, something that was changed because of that. Shortly after that, in the Ellsberg papers, we were spying on American citizens, and the military had to stop that as a result of those kind of actions, you know. Students for Democratic Society, we had to keep an eye on that group that were in the various colleges, you know. In Madison, Wisconsin was another big group over there. You know, country was going through quite a change. It was, you know, these protests and the whole bit. I guess from an experience level, it was really something to be part of it. Not, you know, just trying to do what you're told to do. But now that's all changed. History and the operations, the policies all changed, and the military can't do that anymore. You know, now it's civilian agencies are in charge of that, not the military. So,
You have anything else you'd like to talk about, your experience with Vietnam?
five years later, May of '73, I get an invitation, beautiful calligraphy, invitation from the White House for dinner. Married then, 2 kids then. The government flew my wife and I out for 5 days in Washington, D.C., dinner at the White House with the president. All the ex-prisoners that were released in February and March from Hanoi were there. There was close to 600 prisoners, ex-prisoners, and their wives, or their girlfriends, or their mothers. The State Department put this big function on. Like I said, it was 4 or 5 days we were there. We were at the State Department for some real nice meetings with the president and Secretary Kissinger and a lot of military officials, and then we were at various functions at the places we were staying. They put us up in the Washington Hilton and other big hotels, because there were so many people. You know, we're talking 1,500 people, counting, you know, the spouses or whatever. And got a chance to meet the fellows I was captured with, the ones that survived. 3 were killed, died on the trail heading to Hanoi. None of the group I was with were kept in Hanoi, the famous Hilton. The intelligence team members that I was with were kept about 60 miles north of Hanoi in a small village, 5 years and 2 months. 2 to 3 years, each of them in solitary confinement. No contact with any other American. All had real bad intestinal problems from the food and disease and whatever else, mental problems. It was good to see them. They didn't know that we made it. So we had some nice parties with those folks and their wives and stuff. And when we were told that when they got on the planes in Hanoi to be sent back, one of the first things they said is, you know, whatever happened to Hayhurst? Whatever happened to Hayhurst? They said, well, he made it back. He made it out okay. Well, they were real happy. So when I got to talk with them, I said, when we left that morning after we took off, what did you folks do? What really happened to the rest of you? Well, the guards didn't, he said, the guards didn't know you were gone until later in the afternoon, because this is a real long, skinny trail going up like all over. Well, I can't keep track of the 21 of us spread out maybe over 300 yards probably, you know. They can't see, they weren't counting and they whatever, you know. And we've been together with them for how many days? They weren't worried about any of us attacking them or escaping, you know. So the guards were relaxed. So they said, no, they didn't know you were gone until later in the day. We had picked up your bags of rice and divvied it out, so there was nothing left, you know. They covered for us. And but they were told that we finally were captured by another unit in the trail and were executed immediately, so nobody else try it. Nobody else try it. So that's what the story they were told, you know, but they were tickled to death when they made it. So we've been in contact over the years, and it's been a very good association. All the ex-POWs from Vietnam, once a year, have you go to Naval Air Station, Pensacola for a physical, and there's been data collected on these 600, now there's probably 550 left, because if some have passed away, from all services. You don't all go together, you've got a whole year to get down there and go through a 3-4 day physical, where they're collecting information on mental, physical. It's a big research study. So the fellows that I knew, we try to time ourselves so we get there at the same time and have some fun for the week and go back home, you know. So. And that's been a nice experience. So.
Anything else?
No,
Oh,
I can't think of it.
thank you.
You're welcome.